Hey everyone. I don't know if I have talked about this before. I don't think so. Um, so, when a lot of people think about the pagan movement, I guess, I think that the pagan movement was largely inspired, obviously, by Wicca, but Wicca was in turn inspired a lot by the idea of the Druids in the British Isles and France and actually Switzerland. And now they're saying that there were Celts. I call them Celts. I know that a lot of people say Celts, but my mother always said Celts, and I have a fetish about the soft C, so I tend to say Celts. Anyway, supposedly there were Celts in Spain and even Portugal. And I don't know if that means that they had Druids there also, but the only record that we have, I'm like obsessed with Druids, completely obsessed with Druids actually. I have all kinds of fanciful notions about them, which I'm sure a lot of other people do, which is kind of curious because they're not the only mysterious group of mystics or spiritual leaders that have ever walked the earth. But I think that they have caught a lot of people's fancy in a similar way. The first novel that I ever read, actually, it was read to me before I learned to read. I think I was about 4 or 5, in fact. So it was kind of a little bit more grown up than would have been necessarily appropriate for my age, but my parents thought I was precocious, so they read it to me, and I ate it up. Was this book called The Druids' Tune by O.R. Melling, which, who is, I don't know if it's a man or woman, but it's a Canadian writer, and I loved it. And then a couple of years later, I read The Stone in the Meadow, which was also about druids. And I think it was actually reasonably well researched because at least some of the names I know are from, I think, the Mabinogian. I don't know if the Druid Fidelm is from Mabinogian or from the Ulster cycle, but it's definitely from a legend about a druid. Historically, the only information we have about druids, I think, probably if you're a pagan who is watching this, you have also looked it up, is from the Conquest Annals of Julius Caesar, and a couple of entries from Pliny the Elder, who lived in Britain or England. I guess it would have been called Alba in those days. Anyway, it's interesting to me because when I spent like a summer in England. I'm so sorry about the ghost. The thing is that I've been up all night, and this is as much light as we have. I don't have a professional lighting thing, so sometimes the ghost is there and sometimes it's not. I will, you know what? No, I don't. Oh no, yes I can. This might make a difference. I'm gonna look very strange, but oh gosh. Anyway, Pliny the Elder. I remember what I was talking about. Yes, when I was in England, I had a kind of experience of a druidic nature. I don't quite know how to describe this. I had a summer job in England, and I was constantly being sent out into the city to deliver documents and stuff because I had a kind of clerical job, and the English people in the office thought it, because I was this fresh-faced Canadian, they thought it was very fun to send me into the city and see if I would get lost, which I did. because Toronto is modeled on the fashion sense of men in Canada, which is basically plaid. So it's a grid. We love our straight lines in Canada. I don't love them, but anyway. I did start to miss them when I was in London looking for stuff, because the road system, supposedly the Druids or the Celts made their roads kind of in spirals, and the idea was to thwart the fairies who always went in a straight line, which actually to me seems counterintuitive. I would have thought that the fairies would be the ones going in spirals, but my theory was always that actually the land of England and the British Isles was formed by water, because it's surrounded by water, and I feel like the hills are all made out of waves and whirlpools. And I find that English, but especially, British, I would say, people are more watery in their thinking than, for instance, Austrian people or Norse people. Anyway, I'm getting slightly overly fanciful. So I would go into the city and I would look for things, and London, even London, which is a metropolis, right? And you've had the Roman invasion, and you've had the Norman invasion, and you've had the Saxon invasion. So the influence of the ancient Druids should not really be felt anymore, but I feel like, unbeknownst to themselves, the city planners are still following this Druidic model where everything is in spirals, and you have to, for me to find the places that I had to go, I had to let go of logic completely. Like, forget what you're looking for, forget which way you're facing, forget which way north is. You have to just go with the path and see where it takes you, and trust your gut. And it was like the weirdest thing, because in Toronto you would be walking down a street, and in Toronto all the even numbers of the houses and buildings are on one side of the street, and all the odd numbers are on the other side. In London, not so much. For one thing, London was bombed. There was a blitz, right, during the Second World War. So some of the buildings were bombed. And then when they were restoring some areas after the war, they decided to institute a new numbering system. And then they realized, the old buildings have different numbering systems, and we can't change those numbers because now the brass number plates are antiques and they're part of the whole history of the pre-war houses. So we can't just pluck them off, because that would be kind of here in Thailand they would just do it. They love to demolish old things, but in England there's a bit more reverence for old things, and definitely more than in Canada also. So they just decided to go with the new numbering system and mix it up with the old one. So I'm walking down the street looking for this bloody office. It's like 35, 37, 39, 62. And then it's not even like 62, 64, but it's like 62, 61, 40. And then it goes back to the buildings that were there before the bomb. I guess like this is like right where there's this sort of crater, I guess, and then it got redone anyway. And then I realized that what I was looking for was on the other side of the street, and in fact it kind of emerged out of the weeds, almost like Avalon appearing out of the mist, this place that I was looking for. And it had the wrong number on the building, but I recognized the name of what I was looking for anyway. This is just a small example, but what was interesting to me when I was walking around was the feeling that I had reminded me of the atmosphere of what I felt when I was reading the Druids' tune, and when my parents were reading to me from the Druids' tune. And it was weird because when that book was being read to me, I was on a farm in Sutton in Ontario, so there was nothing really that resembled England around. But suddenly I had this whole atmosphere of what England and the British Isles was, and I didn't recognize what I was feeling then until I re-experienced it walking through London, if that makes sense. And especially also there's this book by what's his name? He did the Alan Garner, The Weird Stone of Bersingamen, and all of those books. Moon of Gomrath and Pelennor. Excuse me. And especially Pelennor, I really started to feel when I was walking around London. So I did this experiment where I would go to all these sort of just not even like not like Epping Forest. I never actually made it to Epping Forest, but like 3 Halfpenny Wood and a few little parks. And it was weird because you could be walking through a park that looked very manicured in England, and then suddenly you would slip into this wild place. And several times I remember feeling like I didn't know anymore where I was. Like, you know, you just passed through 2 bushes or something, and suddenly you were in this wild place, and you couldn't even figure out how there was room for this much wilderness in England, let alone like in the middle of this park in a metropolis. It was like the wildness or the fairy kingdom was sort of bleeding through, and I always found that fascinating because I never ever felt anything like that in England. In Canada, which I find, even though the First Nations are obviously very magical people, and I had a lot of connection to their tradition and I had feelings about them also, but I never felt it when I was walking around in the woods in Canada. It felt very sterilized and kind of devoid of atmosphere, and maybe that's also a symptom of being too familiar with the place, but anyway, so for me, the word druid has more meaning than it might for an anthropologist because I had these experiences when I was young. And, sorry, not an anthropologist, a historian. Because I think that historians think of druids as a sort of just something that we're never going to know much more about, basically, so they don't really... I suspect that a lot of skeptics who delve into the topic don't have a huge feeling about it. They just are academically curious. I watched recently a documentary about, it was in Anglesey, and they had found, I think someone was flying over in a helicopter and they had seen a sort of a formation in the land that suggested that there might be a village there which was kind of close to the area where the Romans had landed when they invaded Wales, and they killed a bunch of Druids. And I'm not sure if Anglesey was a meeting place for the Druids of all of Britain, like if all the Druids regularly had conferences there or something, congregated there, or if it was just Welsh Druids that met there. But Anglesey is really, really famous for Druids. And one of the Roman invaders, I mean, this is the only mention that he makes of the Druids, but he talks about how, you know, they had tried to cast spells on them when the Romans came. I guess not very successfully because they were wiped out. But this is a question I'm often, not often, but I get mail and people ask me stuff about paganism, and they asked me if I thought the Druids had powers, and I think that they did. I think that's one of the definitions of a Druid. But I also think that they couldn't have been that powerful if they were conquered so easily. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to talk about is what Druids are in popular culture. Now, one of the interesting things, because I use tarot a lot, is tarot cards. One of the things that I find very frustrating, and I'm not exactly sure why this trend is the case, but every time there's a deck which is based on Celtic mythology or Celtic beliefs or mysticism, the wand or rod suit, which for me is the most druidic suit, because to me a druid has a staff, and I don't know why I think that. There's no archaeological evidence to say that they do. Maybe it's just an intuitive thing, but to me a druid carries an oak staff or an ash staff or a hawthorn staff, and that is one of his emblems of office. It kind of was in all the books that I read. The Arthurian Tarot and the Greenwood Tarot, notably, these are famous Celtic-inspired tarot decks, have changed the wand suit to spears and I think arrows in the Greenwood, and I don't know why they do that. And those decks actually do have a druidic feeling to them. Like they were successful in creating that feeling for me, but I don't know why they skimped on the wand suit. And that's just a very strange detail, which is a bugaboo for me. But I am one of the people that was very inspired by the Golden Bough, and I think it's the Golden Bough. Or is it Robert Graves' White Goddess? One of those books talks about a druidic tree calendar, and now that has been ostensibly debunked. However, I do think that all of those trees, the native trees to the British Isles and to France, Gaul, and presumably Helvetia, like ash and hawthorn and blackthorn and yew and oak, elder. I think all of these trees were sacred. Whether you subscribe to the connection to the Ogham alphabet and all of that is a different thing, and I think there's there's reason for skepticism about all of that, but I don't think that we have to throw out all the baby with the bathwater, because it was never made abundantly clear to me why what was debunked was all of it debunked, and why it was debunked also, because they just said, oh, well, it was all crap, and I kind of want more detail, and I also kind of want to know why he said all that. I think this was Robert Graves. It was definitely not Kinsley. I have to go look this up anyway. It's part of this stuff is in the Golden Bough, and some of it is in the White Goddess, but yeah. Anyway, our idea of prehistoric Britain and Wales and Ireland and Scotland has changed since I was in school, and what is considered true is now a different landscape. But anyway, I have developed a exercise which I have recently discovered is not. I did not develop it. Actually, a lot of people do this, but for me, I did actually discover it on my own. And then I talked to people, and they said that they do it too. and I call it Druid walking, which is basically I'm recreating the experience that I had in England. And the rules of the game, basically, you can think of it as a game, are that I go for a walk and I just walk in random directions and try to get lost in a way. And also, if I'm being too mental or too linear with the process, what I try to do is follow signs along the way, like follow the way a bird is flying or the way a leaf on the ground is pointing, or the way a statue seems to be looking, or something like that. So it's sort of to train me to be observant also about things that I'm seeing when I'm walking, and also the really scary one, but is also quite important, is to take routes or paths that I haven't been on before. So while it might be very tempting initially, especially to just follow ways that I normally go, I kind of force myself to walk into places that I haven't been or don't know. And sometimes you have unpleasant experiences. Like I'm afraid of dogs, and I have encountered dogs during this kind of. The last time I did this, I did run into a pit bull. It wasn't loose or anything; it was behind a fence and everything, but it kind of caught me by surprise, and we were a little bit sort of nose to nose suddenly. Excuse me. But I still recommend it, because I think that, first of all, you have experiences, you can meet people or have experiences that you wouldn't normally have. And second of all, you go into a meditative state where you're really observing things, seeing things that you haven't seen before. And I invariably experience some form of euphoria doing this. So I recommend it. I think it's a very cool thing to do. I did it in India, and I've been doing it here in Thailand, and every time I do it, I actually feel like I step outside of the mundane world, sort of, if that makes sense. Anyway. The ghost is driving me crazy at this wavy line thing that is going on with my camera, and this is really not a great angle, so... And I've talked for 22 minutes, so I will leave this off and wish you all the best. I wanted to do a pagan video for a long time, but I got sidetracked by politics, so I'm going to upload this now. Blessed be, and may the Druids be with you.